Hello, thank you for joining. My name is Harrison Leventhal, and this is IR Talk. Today, I'll be discussing and comparing the democratization process in the two interesting case studies of Afghanistan and Kyrgyzstan. These cases have many similarities and differences, and I will be analyzing the recent historical political processes that resulted in their current political state. The regional locations and the ethnic and cultural diversity of these two states proved to be obstacles in the establishment of democratic policies. However, despite the obstacles and the many setbacks, these two states are both continuing on their path to democracy. Here is a map of West and Central Asia. The borders of Afghanistan were created by the consultation of the British, Russians, and Persians, and encompasses many different ethnic groups. For our purposes, I will mention only the two largest ethnicities in Afghanistan, the Pashtuns and the Tajiks. I mention these two groups because they play the most significant roles in Afghanistan's politics. Here we see a map of Afghanistan broken down into Pashtun and Tajik population centers. Tajiks made up the forces behind the Northern Alliance, the group who, along with U.S. Special Operations Forces and air support, defeated the Taliban in 2001. They are widely seen as more pro-American. Conversely, the Taliban is deeply rooted in the Pashtun population center and was founded in Kandahar, a Pashtun stronghold. Traditionally, these ethnicities have been in conflict with each other when they were not in conflict with invading forces. Every major empire, from the Persians, Alexander the Great, the British, and the Soviets, have all at one time been involved in Afghanistan. Their history is one fraught with war and mistrust, and it shows in their politics. This differs from Kyrgyzstan because although there is also a plethora of ethnicities, historically, they have not been engaged in a centuries-old war. However, Kyrgyzstan is still divided along tribal lines, and their policies are affected by clan and patriarchal train of thought. That has led to the cases of nepotism and clientism in their post-independence politics. While Afghanistan, after the fall of the Taliban government, had to create a political infrastructure from the ground up during the Bonn Agreement, Kyrgyzstan had its Soviet-era systems still in place, and many of the Communist Party officials became Democrats overnight. During the Bonn Agreement, the democratic institutions were put in place and the framework for the country's future as a democratic nation was instilled. At Bonn, Germany, the various ethnicities gathered to discuss the country's future political outlook. However, there was no mention of the centuries-old ethnic conflict during these discussions. It was decided that a constitution would be ratified on the basis of the old constitution from the 1960s. Also, it was agreed upon that women were to be given the right to vote, and a certain amount of government officials were to be women. New provinces were also made, and an interim government was to be created and led by Hamid Karzai, an ethnic Pashtun, and anti-Taliban. Also, due to the role of the Tajiks in the Northern Alliance, they were given a disproportionately large representation in the interim government, a move that many Pashtuns saw as threatening. The formation of the executive branch of both of these countries has also been a work in progress. In Afghanistan, it was decided not to emplace a prime minister, as it was believed that a prime minister would directly threaten the rule of the president, which could have the potential to devolve into ethnic conflict and civil war. Conversely, Kyrgyzstan has a prime minister. However, the first two post-independent presidents succeeded in limiting their power and consolidating it into their own hands. During the first Afghan election, no candidate had been able to receive a significant base of support outside of his ethnicity. Therefore, the majority Pashtun successfully elected the Pashtun representative Hamid Karzai. Hamid Karzai was also the president during the interim government, and it was widely believed that the United States directly supported his campaign. After being elected, President Karzai replaced many of the ministers of department heads with ethnic Pashtun, and many Tajiks saw this as the Pashtuns trying to gain complete control over the government. This is similar to the post-independent Kyrgyzstan as well, as the first president, Askar Akayev, gave members of his immediate and extended family high-level positions in his government. Eventually, as we will discuss momentarily, corruption became so bad that ministers had to buy their way into office, and military and police forces were responsible for protecting the president's financial interests. The first elections of Afghanistan and Kyrgyzstan were similar, insofar as the candidates did not represent any political party. Instead, they only represented themselves, their ethnicities, and their kin. This reality exacerbated the ethnic tensions in Afghanistan, despite President Karzai's remarks that he represented all of Afghanistan and not just the Pashtun majority. However, despite Taliban threats, Afghanis came out to the polls in unprecedented numbers. In Kyrgyzstan, President Akayev was also re-elected. Now we will move on into the international political economics of these two states and discuss how democracy relates to a developing economy. It has been a widely agreed upon theory for decades that democracy leads to a developed economy, although recently different schools of thought are challenging that ideology in favor for dependency theory. Dependency theory asserts that developing nations become dependent on the industrialized states for finished goods, while themselves only producing raw material and cheap labor. Kyrgyzstan is more representative of the modernization theory, connecting democracy to economic development, than Afghanistan. This is because poverty levels are less in Kyrgyzstan than Afghanistan, and therefore, according to several studies, authoritarian governments are more prevalent in extremely poor states. Kyrgyzstan had more means because of their Soviet-era industrial foundation. After the fall of the Soviet Union, the privatization of state-run industries kick-started their development. However, the unchecked flood of capitalism led to uncontrollable corruption, and a small minority became extremely rich. Afghanistan, on the other hand, had a limited economic foundation, and the majority rural population engaged in agriculture. In fact, most farmers cultivate poppy and are collectively responsible for around 85% of the world's supply of heroin. One of the largest setbacks to the democratization of Kyrgyzstan and Afghanistan is the prevalent corruption. After the first president of Kyrgyzstan was deposed in the 2005 Tulip Revolution after he attempted to set up a dynastic line and give power to his son, it was thought that a new era for Kyrgyzstan was emerging, and there was a lot of hope throughout the country. However, after the president and his family fled to Russia, the next president, Kurmanbek Bakiev, solidified his control of the government and increased the level of corruption in the country. Similarly, along patriarchal lines, the new president gave positions of power to family members and loyal associates, and openly ran organized crime in the country. Afghanistan's record on corruption is equally appalling and ranks only above North Korea and Somalia on the World Corruption Index. President Karzai and those closest to him use state funds appropriated by the U.S. taxpayers, amounting almost to $1 billion. After the scandal became public, lawsuits ensued. However, less than $200 million has been returned to the Afghan public. Besides the obvious negative effects of corruption being less state funds, the daily corruption of government officials detracts foreign investment, diminishing the potential for economic growth. There is, however, reason to be hopeful that the transition to democracy is still on the right path. In the 2014 Afghan election, for the first time, candidates seemed to transcend the base of their ethnic support. Perhaps it was due to the mixed ethnicities of the candidates. However, the votes were extremely close, and a private count had to be conducted. Unfortunately, there were accusations of fraud, and the incumbent, Dr. Abdullah, threatened to break away from the government with his supporters in the West. After much U.S. brokered negotiations, it was decided that there would be a power-sharing government, and Dr. Abdullah took post as President Mohammad Ashraf Ghani's chief executive. This change in the Afghan political structure is an indicator of the continued evolution of Afghanistan's politics. The outlook for Kyrgyzstan is also quite bright. After the Tulip Revolution and Kumarbek Bayakiev's ascent to the presidency, he was also deposed in 2010 for the same crimes as his predecessor. Subsequently, Kyrgyzstan changed their political system to a parliamentary government and vastly reduced the power of the presidency. Later that year, Kyrgyzstan voted in their first free and fair election, becoming the first parliamentary democracy in Central Asia. According to Freedom House, Kyrgyzstan is ranked highest democratically than any other country in the region. Afghanistan, however, is still on its path. Despite many setbacks and the obstacles ahead, I believe there is reason for optimism for the future of Afghanistan. Hopefully, the evolution of Afghanistan's democracy will continue to develop and one day realize their full potential for a brighter future. Thank you for joining me. I'm Harrison Leventhal, and this is IR Talk. Resources will follow.